So this information meeting is being recorded. We will share the recording with you along with the slides that we're going to share today in the next day or so. So hello, welcome everyone. My name is Katie Locke. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at the Gardner Institute. And I'm joined today by Brent Drake, who's the Senior Vice President here at the Gardner Institute. And typically when we do these, Drew Koch, who is the CEO, also joins us. Unfortunately, he sends his regrets and he cannot make it today. So Brent and I will do our best to be our inner Drew and share with you as he would. So we're having conversations, and we've been doing this for about 4 months with educational institutions like yours from across the country. And as we recognize that each of you brings unique and specific concerns, though the overarching theme that we're hearing from institutions regularly is that student retention and graduation is something you would like to improve. So just signing up and coming here today is a testament to your commitment to the education of all students that you serve by seeking approaches to make education accessible and successful for all. And we look forward to being with you today and to having a conversation. We do, as you can see, it's not a big group, so there's plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions and to interact with us. So we don't want this to just be a one-way conversation. And we look forward to being an ally and partnering with you in your endeavor to think about the design of higher education. So what we're going to do today is we'll take about 35 minutes to share some in-depth details about our process, and we'll take pauses along the way so that we can answer your questions, clarify anything, answer something we may have missed. And I encourage you to use the chat, unmute, raise your hand, however you'd like to sort of interject and ask your questions. And the purpose of this is to help you understand what the Gardner Institute offers and to see if our processes is a good fit for your organization. So we're going to start today by talking about how can we get to every student can graduate. And that we're a nonprofit organization with a social justice mission. And we feel that this process really unites those two things. We know that institutions, we know you all are doing a lot. You have a lot of programs, a lot of initiatives in place to improve student success and perhaps to address those performance gaps. And we know that there's been a lot of challenges. I mean, certainly in the last couple of years, just the pandemic alone and the changing sort of political scene has created a lot of challenges for all institutions. And we know that the shifting demographics are causing enrollment to wax and wane and putting stress on yours. And you want to keep your students, you want them to graduate. Ultimately, that's all of our goals. And so we want to help you find those performance gaps and figure out how to address them so that all students can graduate. And we emphasize the word can. We are not suggesting that you turn into a diploma printing machine and that every student gets a diploma. We're not Oprah Winfrey, but we want to address the fact that institutions are often designed in ways that keeps certain populations of students from graduating. And we want to work with you, partner with you to find those performance gaps and address them and redesign some things within your institution to help your students get to graduation. So what is our expertise? Gardner Institute has been around for nearly 25 years. Our founders came to start the Gardner Institute with vast experience in higher education. So we're not a new kid on the block. And we've learned a lot of things in those 25 years that we have taken from our experience early on in the first year to our current emphasis on gateway courses. And we've looked at all of the things that we've learned and said, how can we best support our partner institutions? And one of the things that we've learned is that the inherent design of higher education is part of the problem. And schools are not designed so that every student can graduate. They're designed so every student can't graduate. And the students most often hardest hit are historically marginalized populations. And so we want to address that with you. We want to co-design with you. And that doesn't mean that we're going to come in and say, here's a program. If you just do these 10 things, your school will have, vast increases in retention and graduation. We want to co-design with you. We want to be the guide on your side. We want you, who know uniquely what your institution strengths and where your opportunities are, to take the lead in that. And we support you with our background knowledge and a whole team of higher ed experts to work with you. And we want to focus on equitable outcomes and the elimination of the performance gaps so that the greatest indicators of who graduates is not based on race, ethnicity, demographics like your zip code, your family income. We want to eliminate those as the greatest predictors of who graduates from college. So again, working is about creating design so that every student can graduate. So now I'm going to give my colleague Brent a little opportunity to talk about who we've worked with in the past and some of those outcomes that we've had in that work. Brent?
Thanks, Katie. And I am actually going to share a couple slides. And just making sure you're seeing the actual slide deck and not the presenter view. Okay, great. Saw some people nodding. So as Katie mentioned, we're almost 25-year-old nonprofit organization that our core mission is partnering with educators, colleges, universities, and philanthropic organizations to improve outcomes associated with teaching, learning, retention, and student completion. And by doing so, we hope to strive to advance higher education's larger goal of achieving equity and social justice. And over those 25 years, we've now worked with, this is actually up to almost 550 colleges and universities, but we put the slide deck together back in December and we were at 529 then. Colleges and universities, we are primarily historically have worked with public 4 years, but even with that, you can see that we worked with 146 independent and private colleges. We've also worked with 149 two-year community colleges. We've worked with a little over half of the HBCUs, worked with about a third of the tribal colleges, and worked with 81 separate HSIs out there. So we have served and partnered with a really broad spectrum of the educational sector. And at those 529 institutions, they've served almost 4.2 million students in the time that we have been working with them. And when you look at the breakdown of the students at those institutions, what you see is that we've worked with majority minority populations, so such that white students only make up about 48% of those 4.2 million, and minority and international students make up the remainder. Also, when you take a look at us and the institutions we've worked with, you see that a little over a third of their students are Pell recipients at those institutions. So we also work with institutions that have large lower income populations. So when we talk about our results, we're actually very encouraged here. So we see that those institutions that have partnered with us and have gone on to enact their action plans that they build out with us, around student success, will see a fairly immediate, actually absolutely immediate retention rate gain. So a little over a 1 percentage point gain in retention in the first year after they've enabled their plan. And then as they've been able to refine that over time, work with us to scale it, improve upon it, you see that that retention rate growth increases over time. So that 5 years post-implementation, we see an almost 6 percentage point gain in the retention rate, 5.6 percentage points. And the other very encouraging thing for us in this work is we've been doing it long enough now at almost 25 years that we can see those institutions that we started with 7, 8, 9 years ago have gone on to see graduation rate increases corresponding to those retention rate increases they've seen. So you see that we have increases in the 4, 5, and 6 year graduation rate at those institutions that have gone on to enable their action plans with us. Similarly to the retention rates, part of why you see that the 4 years higher than the 5 and higher than the 6 is that as the institutions have refined their plans over time, that increase in the retention rate will ultimately correspond to the increase in the graduation rates. And so we have to get to a point where that 6 year graduation rate is 5 years post. So that's 11 years post when they first implemented their action plans at the institutions. And given our social justice mission at the Institute, we're even more encouraged by the fact that when we look at those graduation rates for traditionally underrepresented minorities in post-secondary education, we see that they're having comparable gains in their graduation rates as well. So we're helping to close those equity gaps that we see occur in higher education. I'm going to pause there and turn it back over to Katie for her to talk about where we are in terms of next steps.
Thanks, Brent. So what I like to do here is to pause and just talk about what are we hearing from institutions as we're having these conversations. And the things that we're hearing is that enrollment is down, graduation rates are down, stress levels are up, students are overworked and overburdened, staff is overworked. And so these are common concerns across institution types. And before the pandemic, we did a lot of work around improving retention and graduation rates. And now, knowing what colleges are experiencing and what their students are experiencing, we're more committed to our work and from transforming programs to transforming institutions. So our work initially focused on specific parts of an institution, on first year, on transfer, on gateway courses. But what we're thinking about now is how do we look at the bigger picture? How do we look at the foundational first 2 years, the first 60 hours of a student's experience in college or at a university? And how do we make this shift so that their time there is well spent and working towards earning that degree? So Brent is going to talk about what this process, this transforming the post-secondary experience, foundational experience is about and how we're structuring it. So Brent.
Sure. So start by defining a few terms there. We're talking about transforming the foundational post-secondary experience. And what do we mean by that? First, in terms of the foundational post-secondary experience, What we mean is the totality of the first 2 years of your students' experiences at your institution, or roughly the first 60 credit hours completed. So the first half of a 4-year degree, essentially, or the majority of the degree at a 2-year institution. And when we talk about transformation, what we mean is that we're redesigning that experience for students so that every student can graduate. And as Katie mentioned within that, what we mean by that is that we would be eliminating family income, race, ethnicity, or where a student lived at their permanent address as the best predictors of whether a student would complete a degree at an institution, which is what you currently see in most of post-secondary education. So let's talk a little bit about why we've kind of made this shift that Katie talked about, where historically we had offered services around a number of these environments in the foundational post-secondary experience. For instance, we offer a course redesign, we offer transformation of the first year experience, we offer redesign of the transfer experience. Why we're moving away from the idea of offering those single services to looking at this as an institutional whole and trying to transform that broader campus culture. One of the big reasons in that is, as I talked about on our results, where we see those really good results for our institutional partners is where those institutions have really enacted the action plans that go with us through the self-study process to build. And that takes time to do that. So one of our big goals with doing this effort is to help more of our institutional partners achieve that high implementation, because we know that's where we start to really see great results for our students in terms of their ultimate completion with the institutions. Taking that kind of time allows you to refine those efforts and also create a deep and distributed leadership and ownership of student success on a campus. This is really about creating that culture of at a campus of students first and having it owned throughout the whole campus. Obviously, doing something like that is not the kind of thing you can enact in a year or a semester or even 2 years. It's the kind of thing that takes sustained effort by an institution and by us working with institutions to help you achieve that kind of success. So this is about having a longer term commitment to that change and leaning into the process. And also, as Katie had talked about, all of you obviously have a large number of programs and initiatives you're directing at student success already on your campuses. And many of those may function at a very, very high level. Many of them may even be somewhat interconnected, but it is highly unlikely that there is a complete harmonization and overview and synergy throughout those services to create the best experience possible for the student. And so this is about us helping institutions to do that with those services that already exist on their campus, to do that to help them build those things that don't already exist there, and then to make sure that it is a greater interconnected whole at the end of that, as opposed to just being a host of individual programs that exist out there. And finally, when we look at this as a multi-year commitment with it, it's because as our colleagues at AAA SC have said, fix, don't stay fixed. So what we see as can often happen is that you'll devote a lot of effort into looking at a portion of your population on your campus and improve course outcomes for them or retention for them, or maybe even completion rates overall. but then institutional focus might shift over time. And when you don't continue to lean in and always work on this and make it a continuous improvement cycle, those things will start to slide over time, and you'll start to see retention start to wane again. And so this is about helping students succeed at campuses so that campuses themselves can thrive, because they maintain their enrollment. They have more satisfied students who are completing their degrees with the institution, improving the institution's reputation over time. So that's why we're really leaning into all of this. I'm just going to pause a second just to see if there are any initial questions before I get into what the actual process looks like in this transformation process. Okay, then I'm going to share my screen again. This is our theory of change for the transformation process, our focus and approach to it. It is our continuous improvement cycle, or as we like to call it, the wheel, because it goes on and on. As you can see from it, it's broken down into a number of stages that institutions will work with over a 5-year period of time to do this commitment. Because as we talked about, this is about creating that deep set cultural change at the institution. It takes time and effort with that. The very first stage of this, if I can get it to advance, is where we talk about that initial intake and the contextual assessment and building out the initial plan with this. So as Katie talked about, we don't want institutions to come in and we just say in a cookie cutter approach, we'll do these 5 things and everything will be all right. That isn't how it works, and it's not going to be successful for you. It's not going to be successful for your students. So when an institution enters into the transformation process with us, the first thing we do is in the initial 6 months, we utilize 2 surveys on the campus, the institutional transformation assessment and the readiness, willingness, and ability survey, that look at both your capacities around student success at the institution and also your climate in terms of your readiness, willingness, and ability to really dive into some of the work. We go through a sense-making process with you to determine, okay, where are the areas that it's going to be best to focus on first? What are the natural next steps after that? And we build out an initial 5-year plan with you on that work. And then that work begins with, after that sense-making, doing capacity development for the institutions, looking at data capacity and evaluation development on the campus in terms of your institutional research functions, in terms of your ability to look at disaggregated data across the campus and multiple populations for you. We look at capacity development among senior leadership, the president, the CAO, boards and cabinets. If it is a desire and an effort at the campus that the board be more committed and involved in the mission of student success on the campus. We also look at unit leadership in the institution. So this is where we're getting down to those deans and department chair levels and work on doing capacity building with them to help promote those redesign efforts on transformation. So how do you scale up a course redesign across an entire department, so you're not just building out a section or 2 and not totally moving the needle, but it's really about doing a redesign of much of the course efforts or the curricular efforts directly in a department. And finally, there's direct faculty development with it in terms of our Teaching and Learning Academy, what we talk about in terms of best practices and pedagogy to help students be successful in those initial courses at the institution. So as I just talked about, we were talking about those first three, the intake, the contextual assessment, and the deeper analysis and choice. After we go through that and build out that plan with you, we dive into actually implementing that initial plan and then eventually refining and scaling it. And so what does that mean? At this point, after going through some initial capacity development, we start looking at a very deep redesign process, or maybe multiple processes if the institution has the capacity to do it, focused on that foundational experience, whether that be in the gateway courses that happen in those early college years, whether that be in the overall curriculum that happens in the college experience, where we take a look at where unintentional bottlenecks and gateway courses are occurring that need to be exposed by examining the curricular structure as a whole, the complexity of it as it exists. We take a look at maybe redesigning the entirety of the first year experience there and working with you to create a better onboarding transition and first year experience for the students moving into their second year. We push for particularly maybe doing a transfer redesign. So all of that comes out of what we do in that sense making to look at where are the greatest needs, where's the best capacity for you to work initially, and where are you gonna get the greatest gain for your students by operating in there. Spend that first year after the sense making, so you're about 18 months in now, doing that initial planning and implementation on one or more of those redesign efforts. And then as you're implementing it, we're doing the evaluation that we've built up in capacities around institutional research to see how we improve upon it and refine it and scale it so that it is cutting across broadly the institution to impact the maximum number of students possible. So again, we're talking about the plan and implement, and I actually dove a little bit into the refine and scale with it. So finally, in terms of that refine and scale in that rate and refresh process. Again, this is where after you've done those initial implementation, you look much more deeply at what is going on with those in terms of your evaluation, refine it, scale it to the entire institution, track your progress overall on your goals for your transformation during this time. We build out dashboards to help you do that at the institution. Keep doing ongoing capacity development. And then at this point, we're about 2 to 2.5 years into the process, and we do another sense making with you. It isn't as big, it isn't the 6-month process that it was at the very beginning, but it is let's take a look at the work you've done so far. Let's take a look at what the initial plan was. Let's see what has changed in those 2 years. Has a major incident occurred? For instance, a pandemic might happen at some point which no one had ever thought of. And does that change where you're going in terms of those planning and designing efforts? And so the point with this, I'm trying to, yeah, we go back to the wheel, just wanted to make sure. The point with this is that it is that continuous improvement cycle wheel. It's about those institutions that really have this focus on student success and the student success mission, that they are continuously restless in terms of looking at where can we improve? What of those things that we've already worked upon can we make better or need to have refinement so that they continue to grow with our student population? And so it's really about transforming that overall campus culture and having this positive restlessness that Ku and his colleagues have talked about in terms of being so important when looking at high impact practices and performance for institutions around student success. And there, I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. and open it up for any questions anyone might have about the process or what we're looking to accomplish.
I had one question, and feel free to let me know if I can put in the parking lot if it's not applicable group wide. I work for an institution that's fairly new, and so I see the theory of transformation, and I was wondering how that gets applied for an institution that's really more about building up versus transforming and changing things, because we're literally like so new that some of these institutions, some of that infrastructure isn't even there yet.
Yeah, and so that really gets at that idea in the sense making of the fact that we look at two things, both the capacities that are there at the institution, as well as the overall culture. And in the case of an institution that's very new, the highest likelihood is there's going to be a number of those capacities where it's like, oh, we don't have that infrastructure in place yet to really push on what we need to push on. And so there's more of a focus on, okay, how do we build out those capacities early versus we need to redesign some part of it. It might be in terms of, okay, we have a number of programs of study we're wanting to launch. Where should we focus on that? And how do we design those in the best way that allow our students to succeed? And that's where you can look at initial curricular complexity around that and how you design that best for a new program to help students succeed all the way through. So while it's a little bit different in terms of it may not be looking so much at, okay, what are we doing right now? How do we improve upon that? How do we harmonize it? It might be about, we need to build new capacity at the institution for it. And quite frankly, for institutions that maybe have been around for 150 years or more, there can be times where if it hasn't been an area of focus because they haven't looked deeply at this at their institution, it's about needing to build new capacity there for even a long-standing existing institution. But that's where it really gets at what emerges from that sense making on what are the logical first steps for improving the overall experience.
And one of the things I would just add to that is that in many of our processes, as you're building those capacities, for instance, in first year academy or in designing a transfer experience, we have aspirational dimensions or principles that you can apply. And so if you were designing from scratch, as opposed to somebody who would be taking those and applying to what's already there, you would be using those to design for the initial design. So there's a structure that I think applies to very closely to whether you're new or you've been around for a long time.
And looks like Maren, you have your hand up. I have a question.
Maren Havig, yeah.
I'm
the provost at the University of Alaska Southeast, and we've talked with Drew Koch and Brent. You were at our Chancellor's Cabinet last month, so we are going to participate. And I have this feeling that our faculty will want to know how they will be involved. They're, I'm going to say sensitive, that might not be the right word, about not getting in soon enough on initiatives and committees. So, and I'm still a little fuzzy on during the inquiry intake, that first, like, how do you see that rolling out with faculty, and what can I do to garner some faculty input and support?
Yep. So a core fundamental feature and belief across all of our processes at the institution is having early and heavy faculty involvement across it. And that actually gets directly into the sense making as well. So we strongly encourage the institutions with those ITA and RWA instruments to administer those across a broad set of populations at the institutions. One of the key ones being the faculty that are providing instructions in the first 2 years at the institution, and also the faculty leadership in terms of department chairs, in terms of the Senate, things of that nature. And that when we're going through and doing that, sense making, sharing out of the results and talking about what this means in terms of next steps for the institution, that faculty involvement is there. So they see, they're involved in building it. They see it early. They're in the discussion of what does that 5-year plan look like? Because a number of the things that we push on are very, very much the faculty's purview. When we start talking about curriculum and curricular complexity, when we start talking about course redesign, those are absolutely the faculty's purview at an institution, and they have to be intimately involved within that. But even when you're talking about redesigning transfer process and transfer transitions at a university, faculty have to be involved in that as well, because so much of that comes down to, well, what does that mean in terms of the course pathway for a student when they come in? So it's a core tenet for us that faculty have to be there early, faculty have to be there in numbers for us to really get anywhere with this.
That was really helpful. Just a quick follow-up. Is it fair to say that it's not necessarily that I need to put this invitation out to who wants to participate, but initially putting the opportunities out there that faculty can fill out surveys, attend focus groups, those things, like they are coming and we encourage you to participate, not so much, at least early on, I need to pull together a committee of faculty who want to be involved. Yeah. It's broader and more inclusive initially, and maybe even ongoing.
Yeah, so to get into even more detail, and those first few steps with the institution, what we'll ask the institutions to do is identify who will be the primary contact at the institution across the transformation process. So we call that person the project manager for the institution. It's typically 1 to 3 people, shouldn't be more than 3 because you start to run into issues there. But it's a big enough thing that we often see that, yeah, it probably needs more than 1 person involved. We ask the institution to identify that and identify the core team that will be involved in the planning process early. And that is like, you've got to have a data lead on the campus for us to work with. You have to have someone from faculty leadership who can be part of the messaging out to the faculty in the process. You need someone from the student affairs area to be talking about efforts, programmatic initiatives across the student affairs area. So building that core team. We then go through at this time we're calling it a leadership academy. We're still debating on the name of that, but that's what we're calling it right now. That talks about building the core message of the why you share with campus, the big why of this is why we're doing this effort. This is what it means for the institution. This is why we're digging into this, because that helps when inevitably, no matter how much we involve faculty early, no matter how much we involve staff early, there will be a point where when we start to really dig into a process, someone will resist and say, wait a second, why are we doing this? Why are you messing with my course? Why are you messing with my program? Why does this need to be done? And it's about having that structure to fall back to of this is why we do it. And this is how we communicate it out to campus. And this is how we try and build that coalition over time. So those are the really early steps in it. And then as a part of that core team is the one that distributes the 2 surveys to campus, because they'll begun the messaging to campus about here's why we're involved. And in first steps, we really need everyone to be looking at this cultural assessment and this capacity assessment for us.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
And I want to just interject. I see we have two hands up, so we'll get to you. Why this can seem a little daunting when you hear Brent sort of listing them out for a small institution, we have taken that into account. And on some campuses, those 4 different people Brent suggested, maybe, one person doing 2 of those roles. And so I just don't want, if that is a concern for yours, we can talk individually about how we can help you structure it at your institution.
Yep.
And it looks like Fran has a question. We'll go to her first.
Thank you. So my question kind of follows on Lauren's question. I love that phrase continuously restless. And I'm thinking about
proper dues, that is from Koo and Kinsey and their colleagues when they looked at high impact practices at institutions. That's where that comes from.
Okay, so I'm thinking about what you were talking about scaling curricular initiatives across a department. Can you talk a little bit about how you build not necessarily a capacity as much as a desire for change across a broad, tired population? Because you're right, everybody's tired.
Yeah, and particularly after the last couple of years, yes, everyone is very fatigued across campuses. So a big first step when we start looking at either curricular or broad course redesign gets at that data capacity component of it. Because what often happens, so I'll start from the curricular complexity part of it first. What often happens is a curriculum got built with the best of intentions and maybe even had thought about it in terms of here are the learning outcomes we want to move from course to course, but they get built as very separate structures in that, okay, this is what we did in the second semester, so logically this is where we want to go in the third. And prerequisites, co-requisites, what the structure that occurs after that in terms of courses that happen don't get looked at as a whole because it's tough to do that. And so we have a set of tools for the institution that we can load that program of study in, and then it shows, well, because you built it this way, this course winds up blocking 70% of your curriculum after it. Or we see things where, because you logically built prerequisites that made sense that, well, you can't take that course until you've taken that course, and you can't take that course until you've taken that course, where you wind up looking like, in a lot of the STEM disciplines, that calculus is a direct connected prerequisite to their 8th semester capstone course, because it's just built as a prerequisite chain, which makes it appear like everything you did in calculus is necessary for that capstone course, which is probably not the way the faculty intended to design all the efforts. And so it lets them look at and think about, oh, wait, why was it we wanted to connect things in this way? What was the core goal and objective we were wanting to get out of it? And how do we redesign the curriculum a little bit so we're passing that goal on without saying this entire course is a prerequisite all the way through? Because when you get into those big chains like that, what always happens is that students will take longer than 4 years to graduate. Students will often get discouraged in the discipline because so much of the curriculum is blocked from them, and will go to other disciplines, if not leave the institution altogether. So that's one way where we talk about it in terms of we give that tool so that faculty can actually see, oh, this is what happens with how we structured it. And that naturally leads to, because almost everybody, I'm not going to say everybody because you can't talk in absolutes, but almost everybody got into this business because they cared about imparting knowledge to students and helping students succeed. So when they see these natural structures, happen that they didn't plan for, they go, oh, I want to make that better. This is why I was here. Same thing in terms of course redesign with it. Oftentimes, faculty are not aware of the disaggregated results that are happening in terms of their course. They may know very, very well overall what their non-pass rate, their DFWI rate is for the course. They probably don't know what that looks like for first generation students, for Pell recipients, for Black, Latinx, Indigenous students. And overwhelmingly, when we look at that across courses, those students almost always, again, won't talk in absolute, but almost always have lower pass rates in those courses. And when faculty start to see that and see that, well, it just continues a cycle of what was there in their K through 12 education, and how do we redesign so every student can be successful within it? Most faculty then tend to say, I want to lean into this to make this better for all of my students. So we really lead with those tools and that data structure. And that's why that institutional data capacity is a big part of that capacity building we do at the early onset for the institution. Because you don't know what you don't know.
Thanks, Brent. And I want to be very cognizant of time. And I do know that people always want to know, what does it cost? How do we apply? So I'm going to ask you, Brent, to respond to Barry's question, and then we'll get to that.
And I'll try and be much more succinct in my response to Barry's question. Oh, you're still muted, Barry.
And I will try to be succinct to my question. Yeah. No, I think the process is quite good. I do think that Kim has raised a very good question about it. We're always trying to change 50 or 100-year-old institutions, and you've got all sorts of inertia built in there. But actually, I was auditing a college in France just a few weeks back, a new college, and you had as you referred to it there, but one person doing 2 jobs, another person doing 3 jobs. And that can actually build in systemic issues that will arise down the line, you know. But my actual question is this: two very brief questions in terms of stakeholder involvement. Where do students come in on the wheel? Number one, and the external environment, and I'm particularly thinking of professional bodies. Like in my last institution, we had 60 different professional bodies, be they accountancy or chemical engineers or biomedical sciences, accrediting our courses. And one of the last refuges of the intransigent is academic rigor, and the institution says X, so I'm not moving. And it goes back to your whole question about calculus, which is the classic example. So just very briefly, where do they fit into the external environment and the student?
Yeah, so similar to the faculty involvement, we like to try and get the student voice in as early as we can. Ideally, you'll have some kind of student voice in that core initial leadership team. We highly recommend those initial surveys, particularly the cultural survey, the RWA, go out to a student population as well, so that you're getting the student voice in there. And in the redesign efforts, as much as possible, we recommend having a student voice in those self-study groups and efforts as well. I'll freely admit some institutions do it better than others, but it is something we encourage across with it. In terms of the broader, all of the professional accreditations across disciplines, as well as the broader accreditation for the whole university, as well as anything that might be, let's call it a pressure point from existing legislatures or systems of higher education within the state. This really gets at this idea of trying to harmonize efforts as much as possible. As much as we can through that, we want to align what we're doing in these redesigns to what is happening in terms of your strategic planning for the institution, which then also feeds into what you're doing for broader accreditation. And when we talk about course redesign, yes, we always run into the, no, it has to be this way because Nursing Society or something else says it has to be this way. But we talk about it in terms of, yes, but it's about getting the learning outcome that society wants while still achieving goals for all students. So how do we allow that to occur? It isn't that it has to be this course in this way. It's that this learning objective is what ultimately education discipline wants for their students. So
Thanks, Brent. Thank you.
So because we are getting late on time, I'm gonna pass it back to Katie to be able to talk about how many institutions we're recruiting for these initial efforts, our philanthropic support around it, and then ultimately what the institutional commitment is with it.
Thanks, Brent. So what we are looking for in this initial phase, this cohort 1, is 10 to 15 institutions. I think we have approximately 7 who are committed and probably another 10 to 15 who are considering starting with us. And why we say 10 to 15, if we have 16, that's okay. The deadline for applying is, right now it's May 1st. We do understand that making a 5-year commitment, which is what we're asking for, sometimes requires quite a few hoops at an institution and some red tape. So if you need extensions on that, we're certainly open to having that discussion. So how do you apply? So the application is on, there's a link on our website. It's on our platform. It's a relatively short application. It's 4 to 5 questions. The key thing is that we want to have conversations and commitments with leadership at your organization. We don't want this to be an initiative that happens over here and is not fully embraced. So typically what we do, as Maren said, is we meet with the leadership team, and like we did with Alaska, and so that can include the chancellor and the president, definitely include the chief academic officer. And so we can really have that commitment kind of conversation. And then once we've had those, the application is completed, then there's a process of signing an agreement. And so that's it really in a nutshell. So that was very quick. So basically it's an application and a commitment conversation. And oftentimes, and typically I would say, it's multiple conversations with leadership at your institution. Usually there's we'll do an information meeting, depending on who's there, something not dissimilar to this, where we kind of give you a high overview of the process and then answer your questions. Then you go back and talk about it, and then we have just that final sort of commitment conversation. So what are the fees? Let me share the screen and show you that. So the fees are based on your undergraduate enrollment. And so these are the fees per year with a 5-year requirement. Leo Lambert, who's one of our board members and was the president of Elon University for a long time, says it takes 10 years to make real change. And we recognized that if we asked institutions for 10-year commitment, people would run away screaming. But we felt like the 5 years gives you that kind of intense involvement to really start to see the change. And whether you continue on the process on your own or continue with us, you have it's entrenched enough in your culture. There'll be a cultural shift. This work is being supported by 4 different philanthropies: the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Ascendium, Kresge, ECMC, thank you. I had another one that was going to come out of my mouth and I knew that was wrong. So those 4 institutions organizations have made a commitment of around $7 million to this process. But one of the conditions for all of them was that the institutions involved had modest but real support. So that's where the fees come in, and the structure is based on the undergraduate enrollment. Kim, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Katie, for explaining that. It's very minor, but on the website, the fees differ by like 1,000 to 1,500. I'm guessing that's like maybe a typo.
I will have to look at that. Thank you.
And then a follow-up question for you. I heard it was Gates, ECMC, and what were the other two, please?
Ascendium and Kresge.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll honor whatever the lowest is. So don't worry about that. But it may have been things have been tweaked and they didn't get tweaked in both places. So we'll look into that. Thank you.
Reminder. Thank you.
And we use undergraduate enrollment as determined by College Navigator. So which is publicly available. So other questions about the fees or the process for applying? One of the things that Drew always goes through, and I realized that we really didn't, is that we do want a diverse set of institutions. So we're not looking for just R1 institutions or just 2-year or 4-year. We would like to have in each cohort a representation of different types of institutions. And there'll be part of the process is a community of practice, and there'll be some opportunities to work with institutions that are more like yours and institutions that are diverse, because we really believe that, based in our experiences, that really good learning comes from, not just being with people who are like you, but people who are different from you too. So in an institution way. So that is definitely built into this process. So we have 3 minutes left. I do like to try and be timely and not keep you over. I appreciate you staying. If you would like to set up that initial meeting, you can email. The easiest way to do that is email info@gardnerinstitute.org. And that comes to me and I will make arrangements. Usually that initial meeting is with Brent, Drew, and myself, or 1 or 2 or 3 of us, depending on availability. And so we can make sure that I'll make sure that we get that set up. And any other questions, comments?
And Katie mentioned in the chat, but I'll just reiterate it again. We'll send out both the recording and the slides to everyone who was registered for today, along with, well, it'll come from that info email address, but it'll have the contact address for us.
And thanks for your patience. One last question. Did I hear you correctly that this is the first ever cohort and that's why you're trying to get the 15 to 17?
Yeah. So the philanthropy's goal with us is that over the 3-year period, we will ultimately enroll 50 institutions in this process. And so cohort 1, we're looking for 10 to 15. Next year, we'll do 15 to 20. And then in year 3, we look to have add another 25 institutions. All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time today. We want to be cognizant of time, so we'll wrap here. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and Katie will get the information from this session out to all of you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.